Walt Disney may be a household name today, but he spent much of his early career dodging creditors and the threat of bankruptcy. Walt Disney is perhaps one of the most well-known names today. Who hasn't heard of Disneyland, Mickey Mouse, or a Disney princess? Most people, both children and adults, can name their favorite Disney movie and may break out into song if you let them. Although Walt Disney was not the only person working on animated movies, he embodied a determination and resilience that allowed him to live out the American dream with the uniqueness that we still admire today. Walt Disney's life started out as perfectly normal, though. He was born on December 5, 1901, in a neighborhood just north of Chicago, Illinois, growing up with four other siblings and spending most of his childhood in Marceline, Missouri, on a large farm. In the quiet of the countryside, Walt Disney first began honing his artistic abilities and fell in love with cars and trains. When his father moved the family to Kansas City, Walt became a part of his father's newspaper service. He and his brother would deliver the morning and evening papers, and the business eventually grew to include milk and eggs. They were so busy that Walt might not have had much time to draw or study, but he certainly learned how to be a hard-working entrepreneur. He clashed with his father about many things, but Walt still learned how to set, achieve, and reevaluate goals. This would serve him well once he reached adulthood. Walt Disney learned more than just good entrepreneurship skills in Kansas City. He met a boy named Walter Pfeiffer at school, and the Pfeiffer family introduced Walt to theater and motion pictures. He fell in love with it all, and would sometimes even perform skits with the Pfeiffer family on amateur nights. As Walt grew older, he continued to hone his artistic skills. He even took a correspondence course on cartooning. The stage seemed set for him to launch into the world and become a star. Instead, Walt came of age and suddenly had to face the same problem most young people have to face: how to find and keep a job. Outside of the newspaper route he rode for years, Walt Disney's first job was as a news butcher. It's not what it sounds like us today. Back in 1917, a news butcher was someone who sold refreshments on trains, like candy, fruit, and soda pop. By all accounts, Walt Disney was terrible at his first job, partially because he kept eating the candy he was supposed to be selling. So he did not keep his job for longer than a few months, just like most teenagers on their first summer job. In 1918, Walt decided to join the Army, even though World War I was winding down. After lying about his age and overcoming a bad flu during the 1918 epidemic, Walt finally landed on French soil in December of 1918 as an ambulance driver after the war was officially over. Walt continued to draw while he was overseas, and some of his caricatures of the men in his unit earned him a little money. It wasn't enough, though, and when Walt returned to America in 1919, he was determined to follow his dream and become a professional cartoon artist. In those days, newspapers across the country had professional cartoonists on staff, usually to draw advertisements, so his dream actually had a practical foundation. Finding such a position, though, proved to be challenging. The Pesman-Rubin Commercial Art Studio hired Art in an apprentice position, but he was dismissed 6 weeks later because the work dried up. So how did Walt Disney become one of the most famous cartoon artists in the world? He and Ub Iwerks, a letterer who had also been let go from Pesman-Rubin Commercial Art Studio, decided to go into business together. Although their first venture into self-employment was not as successful as they would have liked, it also wasn't a complete disaster. When Walt saw an advertisement from the Kansas City Slide Company for a cartoonist, he jumped at the opportunity, determined to make his and Iwerks' business a success. They were now working for Arthur Vern Cogger, the man who had worked with some of the best in the business, and Disney, true to his nature, kept innovating. Instead of sticking to stop-motion animation, Disney began working on cell animation, which was the next big step. An artist has layers to work with in cell animation, but each layer has to be drawn individually. It took a long time to draw an advertisement this way, but it also helped to produce 3D images. No one else at the company really shared Disney's enthusiasm for cell animation, so with Cogger's wary blessing, he began to experiment on his own. It was in his private garage-turned-studio that Walt Disney began to create the first works that would get him to Hollywood. His first attempts at running his own companies did not end well. In fact, one of his ventures ended so badly that he was dodging creditors, process servers, and bankruptcy. Most people would have given up or at least decided to wait a few years for the market to become less volatile. But Walt Disney never handled his dreams like most other people. Just when everything seemed to be crashing in around him, Walt packed up what little he had and moved to Los Angeles. Although many of us today might think Los Angeles is the place for anyone interested in working in the entertainment business, in 1923, Los Angeles was the home of live-action filmmakers, not cartoonists. For a little while, Walt encountered the same issues in Los Angeles that he had encountered in Kansas. No one was really interested in his cartoon work. But Walt was not one to give up easily. He continued to visit production studios, usually under the guise of looking for a job, and he continued to meet with people about his cartoon work. All of his hard work paid off. Walt Disney finally found someone willing to pay him to create cartoons based on Alice in Wonderland. He had been working on this idea for a while, but with his newfound and serious buyer, they named the live-action cartoon series the Alice Comedies, and Walt convinced his brother Roy to start the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio together. The work was hard, the hours were long, and Walt's staff was small and inexperienced, although iWorks would come and join him. But for the first time, he was doing work that was sure to turn a profit. By 1924, Walt Disney was becoming famous in Los Angeles, partially because he had discovered a talent for directing animated shorts and partially because he was the only major animator in town. His work on the Alice series is what really launched Walt Disney into the major leagues of Hollywood, where he was able to begin negotiating for high profits and could afford high quality. In 1926, the Disney Brothers Cartoon Studio moved to Hyperion Studios, and the company decided to change its name to Walt Disney Studio. As more and more studios asked Walt Disney to design characters, he hired more and more animators. Soon, his studio was not only producing Alice, which starred a cat named Julius, but also a rabbit named Oswald. Oswald turned out to be more drama than he was worth for Walt Disney. After creating the character for Charles Mintz at Winkler Productions and signing a 3-year contract, Charles tried to take Oswald for himself, and most of Disney's staff as well. Ownership of animated characters can be a complicated legal mess, especially back then. Because Charles had paid for the creation of Oswald, the character was technically his, even though he wasn't the one actually creating the animated shorts. Walt Disney was furious about how underhanded Charles was with their contract, but washing his hands of the rabbit Oswald allowed Disney and iWorks time to create one of the most well-known characters in the world, Mickey Mouse. There would be clashes and drama along the way, but Mickey Mouse was a hit almost right from the start. Building on the popularity of Mickey, Walt Disney created shorts and, eventually, the first feature-length animated film to be done completely with cell animation. His work would go on to revolutionize the animation business, making Walt Disney one of the most famous cartoon artists in the world today. But what made Walt Disney so unique in the American entertainment industry? Walt Disney had a vision that few other people ever had. He didn't accidentally stumble into revolutionizing the animation entertainment industry. He led that revolution from the front lines. He was willing to innovate and experiment with new techniques and new technology, always working to achieve the vision he saw in his head for a well-animated movie. Walt Disney also had an intense drive. Walt was not perfect by any means, and many of his workers complained that his drive caused him to occasionally treat them badly and come across as egotistical, which is partially why iWorks left to try and strike out on his own. Despite how his intensity could appear, Walt was dedicated to his goals. He would often work long nights in the studio instead of relaxing at home with his wife and daughters, determined to improve the quality of everything his studio produced. You can't achieve a vision without a good bit of determination and hard work, and Walt Disney certainly had all three. But perhaps the aspect of Walt Disney that made him most unique in the American entertainment industry is that he didn't stick to what he knew. Walt Disney stepped into the world of animation when everyone was doing live-action animation. You would film a scene and then add a few animation elements to the scene afterward. Walt did this type of animation for years, but he wasn't content to stay in one place. This desire to become better and to innovate caused him to teach himself cell animation, even though his boss at the Kansas City Slide Company didn't approve. It's what caused him to move to Los Angeles, even though New York would have been the safer place to pursue animation. It's what caused him to begin producing animated movies, one of the first in the business, and it completely changed how America and the world saw the potential for animation. Most importantly, Walt Disney did not limit his business concerns to animation. Instead, he began to build a brand around Mickey Mouse and the Disney princesses, creating a level of quality and familiarity that the world would recognize. As part of his brand, Walt Disney began building Disneyland in 1954, even though he had to look to outside sources to secure the funding. By 1955, Disneyland was ready to open to the public, and although the first day was not a roaring success, after the first year alone, there had been 5 million visitors to the park. There were only 13 to 20 attractions at the time, but Walt's plan had been to create a theme park that the whole family could enjoy. Disneyland would eventually grow into the theme park that many people know and love today. But like always, Walt Disney was not content to have one successful theme park. His innovations and visions for the future never ceased, and in the 1960s he began planning Epcot as a celebration of the innovations of the future. This wasn't meant to be a theme park as much as it was meant to resemble a futuristic city, and although he died before it was completed, Epcot was still built with Walt's vision in mind, even though it turned out more like a theme park than a functional city. Disney is one of the most famous brands in the world. Although Walt Disney did not leave Kansas City with the goal to create a brand that could support a host of major theme parks, his story is a true rags-to-riches tale that forms the backbone of the American dream. Walt had a vision, put in hours of hard work, and persisted until he had achieved his dream to be a successful and respected animator. After achieving that, imagination was the only limit. To learn more about Walt Disney, check out our book, Walt Disney, a captivating guide to the life of an American entrepreneur and pioneer of animated cartoon films. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.